Are you struggling to write distinct, compelling characters? Do the figures in your book start to blend together after a while? Or you're just not sure how to write character interactions that are realistic and vivid? Well, here are some tips and tricks that I've picked up over the years to help you with defining and writing multiple characters. To begin with, I'll confess that my own writing sensibilities lean towards film and television more than traditional novel writing. What do I mean by that? Well, I tend to write my novels scene by scene. I think of my characters as actors, and I try to frame action, conflict, and drama in a very visual way. So when I'm thinking through character interactions in my books, I'm doing so through the lens of cinema. Now, I found that this approach has some great advantages, but I know that it won't be for everyone. So what follows will likely be valuable to writers of genre fiction, fast-paced thrillers, horror novels, urban fantasy books, and so on. But if you're writing historical romance or slice of life novels, feel free to stick around because there's always something new to learn. Character profiles. The first step you need to take if you want to write about multiple characters is to clearly define the personality of each character. The easiest way to do this is to write out a character profile for each of your main figures. This profile should include things like physical characteristics, clothing choices, physical maladies, preferred ways of moving and interacting with others, how they talk and what their inner voice sounds like versus how they talk with others. Do they rely on well-worn idioms? Do they speak eloquently or prefer silence? Key details of their personal history, family relationships, past traumas, career history, political and religious leanings, psychological makeup, regrets, fears, self-doubts, blind spots. How active or passive do they tend to be when presented with stressful situations? Clarity is the key here, and the best way to be clear is to lean on real-world people that you know well. Use your experience with family and friends and acquaintances to furnish your characters with quirks and habits, distinguishing physical features and speech foibles. The more realistically you can paint your characters, the more clearly readers will be able to visualize them, and the better you'll be able to determine how each character will act in a given circumstance. Distinct characteristics. You don't have to give one character an eye patch and another a mohawk to make them distinct figures in your novel. In addition to physical attributes, think about the language they use, the way they interact with others, how they handle stressful situations, and how their perspective differs from other characters in your book. Subtle differences in perspective can go a long way in clearly distinguishing your characters without resorting to caricatures. Your protagonist's viewpoint on politics, philosophy, or religion might differ slightly from their offsider. One character might be defined by a childhood fear which has developed into a lasting phobia that impacts on relationships with others. There are a million different ways to differentiate between characters, and the skill of writing is in subtly employing these differences in ways that might not be immediately apparent, but they add to the depth and complexity of your story. Authentic character dialogue. For characters to feel real to readers, you need your character dialogue to sound authentic. Their words should align with their personality, their background, and the circumstances they find themselves in. Do they rely on well-worn idioms or speak with deliberate precision? There are also a huge range of accents, colloquial phrases, idioms, vocational catchphrases, and so on that you can employ in your writing. One great example of an authentic voice comes from Joe Abercrombie's The Blade Itself and the character of Logan Nine Fingers. The tone and texture of Logan's dialogue fits his character perfectly. He's rough and brutish, but also thoughtful and at times insightful. He relies on well-worn sayings passed on from his father and the people of his homeland. He leans toward brevity rather than verbosity. There's gotta be a better word than verbosity. Speaky much? Much speak. Talkativity? In short, the man's words align perfectly with his character. Do the same thing with your characters and they'll feel authentic to readers. It will also help you differentiate clearly between different characters in your story. Character conflict. One great way to invest character relationships with depth and vitality is through conflict. You might add in a playful jab here or there, engineer a steadily burning antagonism which grows over time, or narrate outright hostility. Conflict creates stress, and placing your characters under stress provides a great opportunity to explore a range of personality quirks, fears, doubts, blind spots, and so on. Picture yourself sitting in a cafe with a friend. You're eating your panini, and you hear slightly raised voices from a couple sitting nearby. It doesn't matter what your friend is saying or how delicious that panini is, you can't help but look. And that's because we're drawn to conflict, no matter the shape or size of it. Even the most subtle passive-aggressive signals are easy to pick up on. So include a little conflict in your character interactions, because it's a fantastic way to grab your reader's attention and keep them invested. Internal conflict. Now, conflict doesn't need to be overt, and it doesn't need to be external. It might surface merely as the discomfort one of your main characters feels. There doesn't need to be words spoken in anger, punches thrown, or swords drawn for conflict to emerge and add texture to your writing. All that's required is for one of your character's beliefs to be challenged. Your protagonist might need to struggle with internal conflict which has been prompted by another character. Their internal monologue might be working through doubts and fears introduced by the sheer act of rubbing up against someone else whose worldview contradicts their own. So, while the source of the conflict is the interaction of two characters, the conflict and resolution itself might be contained within the mind of one figure. Action and reaction. Some of your characters will naturally be more proactive than others. They'll take charge in a crisis situation, issuing orders, rallying the troops, and assuming a leadership position. Others will prefer to assume a more subservient role. Some will be too fearful to act, others will be reckless, and some won't even care one way or the other. When mapping out your character profiles, it's important to clearly identify which of your characters will play a leading role and which will prefer to be pulled along by circumstance. If you've got too many leader-type figures, this will invariably lead to conflict, something which you might actually want to explore. If you've got too many follower-type characters, then this means your story might meander, with blind circumstance driving the momentum rather than the protagonist forging ahead as the story unfolds. Now, either of these options are legitimate, as are a myriad of different configurations. The key is that you've done the work of identifying these traits up front, because this will help you clearly differentiate roles once you start writing. Now, one thing to note here is that throughout the writing process, you'll really start to get to know your characters. And those characters might start to surprise you. They might act in ways that are contrary to what you laid out at the planning stage of your novel. If this happens, then you'll need to decide whether you follow your characters where they lead and change your novel accordingly, or rethink the character and align them more closely to the personality you originally envisaged. Indicating long-term relationships. For characters who've known each other in the narrative world for some time, you'd expect a level of shorthand in their communication. They'd have inside jokes, shared experiences, and a way of talking with one another that hints at that long-term relationship. When writing multiple characters, particularly those that have shared a history, it's important to think about how past experiences will shape their current relationship. We all have personal habits, biases, and well-worn idioms that we rely on, and this is also the case with many of our long-term relationships. To hint at a rich and meaningful history, consider including a few of these kinds of details with key characters in your novel. Some examples of this might be referencing someone from the past that both characters know and despise, an idiom or catchphrase that both characters use repeatedly, an inside joke that only those two figures share, the memory of some shared trauma from the past, such as serving together in the armed forces, suffering an abusive parent, surviving a natural disaster, and so on. The key is to add these details to your character profiles, but don't refer to them heavily in your writing. The odd reference here and there will add color and depth to these characters, but if you labor the point, it will become tiresome to readers and start to make your characters feel wooden and unrealistic. Characters changing characters. If key characters in your novel are spending a lot of time together, you can expect them to rub off on one another. This might be shown in direct actions, changes of opinion, or shifts in dialogue. Your protagonist might have a clear bias against certain types of people, but when forced to work with one of those people for an extended period of time, awareness might dawn and your main character might shift their opinion a little. Conversely, your protagonist might resist change for the majority of the book or maintain their bias right throughout the novel. Either way, this drive towards crisis and resolution will add flavor to your character interactions, particularly with key characters who are thrown together by circumstance. This kind of interaction between characters doesn't need to involve conflict either. It could be a budding romantic relationship or a move from antagonism to begrudging friendship. The key is that people can change, and showing that in your novel is a great way to add depth and complexity. Love and friendship. One natural result of characters interacting in your novel is the emergence of a romantic relationship, or a relationship which threatens to blossom into love but never quite makes that jump. This kind of connection will allow you to employ a vast range of tasty writing techniques, such as changes in body language, or changes in dialogue as the relationship evolves, the debating of an inner monologue, confusion, doubt, stress, conflict which ultimately leads towards a romantic resolution. You could explore the speed problem, where two people are thrust together in a crisis only to find that their relationship flounders once that crisis has been resolved. Or you could explore the sting problem, where a love triangle results in unrequited feelings of affection and no one gets what they want. Love, romance, and everything that comes with an intimate relationship is fertile ground for any number of scenarios. It's also a great way to add tension and drama to your novel, and because it's so fundamentally human, readers will be drawn to it like moths to the flame. Reader perspective and distance. It may not seem that important when writing a novel, but I like to consider distance when I'm writing a scene with interacting characters. How close is the reader to the action? Are they standing behind one of the characters, viewing the exchange from that character's perspective? The volume of their voice, their tone, the movement, hand gestures, reactions of those nearby, all of this will depend not only on what's being said, but on how close I want my reader to feel to the action. Now, this isn't necessarily something to be overtly added to a scene, but having a clear picture in your head of the reader's perspective during each scene will help you craft more vivid sections of dialogue and bring your character interactions to life. Well, those are some of my thoughts on how to write distinct and compelling characters and character interactions. It's not an exhaustive list, but that's good. It'll give me a chance to come back later on and add more. Now, I'd love to hear how you go about differentiating your characters. So feel free to drop a comment, and if you've enjoyed the video, why not subscribe to the channel? Now, if you want to learn more about how to improve your characters, check this out.